It's my privilege today to introduce our keynote speaker and final panel of today. So in that regard, let me first set the stage a little bit. We've talked an awful lot this week about technology. Technology in terms of how rapidly is it developing, where is it going, even the technology of technology. So the question remains, and it'll be addressed today with this panel and this discussion, is what about real estate? What exactly does it mean as it works its way into real estate, and how will that impact our lives in the real estate business? And we have an excellent group to accomplish this for you today. So let me start by giving you just a little bit of background about our keynote speaker, and that is Paul Saffo. Paul is a forecaster with over 2 decades experience exploring the dynamics of large-scale, long-term change. He teaches forecasting at Stanford University and chairs the Future Studies and Forecasting track at Singularity University. Paul is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Services. Paul serves on a variety of not-for-profit boards, including the Long Now Foundation and the Bay Area Council Economic Institute. Paul's essays have appeared in a wide range of publications, including the Harvard Business Review, Fortune, Foreign Policy, Wired, the Los Angeles Times, Newsweek, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Paul holds degrees from Harvard College, Cambridge University, and Stanford University. He will spend some time talking about things like Moore's Law and pace layer thinking, and helping us to understand why the rate of change is so critical to our business. Then our panel will share their perspectives on technology and, along with Paul, discuss the future trends and, as I said earlier, this impact on real estate. Joining Paul will be Patrick Phillips, Global CEO of ULI, who will moderate the discussion, Michael Covarrubias, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of TMG Partners, and Daniel McQuaid, the Group President, Construction Services for AECOM. So please join me in welcoming our final presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to start straight from the podium because you can think of me as kind of the aperitif before the main event, and I am looking forward to grilling them with a couple of questions. And I'll switch to my first slide, if I may. I'm going to talk a little bit about the changes afoot, and let's go, yeah, well, we'll stay right there. I want to talk about exponentials, and this is the exponential that everybody knows. Moore's Law, I'm sure you've had it mentioned a couple of times. You know, the number of chips on a circuit double every 12 to 18 months, and I could start putting you to sleep if I said more. And it's had a big impact. It's why Silicon Valley does so well, and there's, you know, the new national bird of the Bay Area is the crane. It's the exponential that everyone knows, but what I see again and again is very few people understand exponentials intuitively. That, you know, it's one thing to get it in your head, it's another thing to get it in your heart and really understand what's going on. That includes even my Stanford students who, you know, they can do differential equations in their sleep, but to really get exponentials is kind of hard. So let me give you a couple of examples and talk a little bit about exponentials. Talk about one example of surprises in the robotic vehicle space. I know you've talked about a lot this week, but I may surprise you. And then give you a model for how to think about change in this world of accelerating change and how it bumps up against other things. So this is a picture of the Apollo guidance computer. This is what took the astronauts to the moon. It was 10 megahertz, 16-bit, 2K of RAM, and it weighed 70 pounds. I mean, I look at this and I'm just absolutely terrified at how brave those men were. And it would be really fun to have one. I'm a geek, I like to collect stuff, and they're kind of expensive and they're hard to find. You know, I think Elon Musk has one, but the rest of us can't. But the good news is that you could have your own Apollo computer if you wanted. So last night I went up onto eBay and I bought one. And it's that greeting card insert down there, recordable voice module for greeting card music sound talk chip. It's $1.70, and that's actually a little highly priced. It's probably about 60 cents, and it has got more processing power than the Apollo command computer that took men to the moon. So we're literally living in an age where we're putting more computing power in our cards than our gift cards than we put into our spacecraft. If you have a smartphone, Samsung Galaxy, Apple iPhone, that thing, your smartphone operates at 250 times the speed of the Apollo computer and has 4 billion times the memory. That what you're carrying in your pocket would have been a breathtakingly impressive supercomputer in 1988. So that's kind of the world we're in, and it's already, of course, affecting the space you all live in. Solar photovoltaics are just a big chip, and they're not even a sophisticated chip. Microprocessor engineers go, that's so easy to make. Well, this is the price history. We haven't just crossed grid parity, we're blasting past grid parity. This stuff is going to approaching zero. The only whole thing holding back PVC tech at the moment is we haven't figured out good storage. But trust me, exponentials are slipping into that space too. And when we get storage coupled with solar photovoltaics, it's really going to change a lot of things. That's just one spot where it touches. But again, it's hard to understand these things. So bear with me for a moment. Let's see, I don't know if this stage is quite long. So I'm going to take 30 steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm going to go out the stage, say 9, 20. So I'll be about 10 feet there. That's 30 linear steps. Now imagine I come back here and I take 30 exponential steps. So my first step is this far, my second step's twice the distance. My third step, I probably have to be a broad jumper to do it. 30 exponential steps is 1 billion meters. 24 orbits around the Earth. That's the difference between linear change and exponential change. We are in a world where we are being surrounded by phenomena that are nonlinear, just like this, and it is turning up surprises in all sorts of areas. And it's not just computers. Exponentials are absolutely ubiquitous. If 30 exponential steps will get me around the Earth 4 billion, or 1 billion, or 24 times 1 billion meters, think about 41 doublings over 9 months. 41 doublings over 9 months equals 1 trillion cells. That's what we call a baby. Babies, exponential growth of cells. So a human ovum goes from 1 cell to 1 trillion cells in 9 months. Exponentials are the signature of life. And it's a key factor. Exponentials are not just the invention of Silicon Valley geeks. Exponentials have been around for quite a while, and they're also creating interesting challenges, like population growth. This is human population growth from 10,000 BC to 2000, a rather dramatic exponential. And a reminder, in a very important way, that we live in an age not just of exponentials and exponential opportunities, but exponential challenges. And if I had to reduce the entire modern condition down to a single challenge, that challenge would be, can we, in our ingenuity, use the positive exponentials effectively enough to overcome the consequences of the negative exponentials? And of course, this stuff is touching every aspect of our lives. Now, this all has an important implication that, I'm showing a upward turning hockey stick or hockey stick curve. Nature abhors hockey sticks. There is no such thing unless you're in marketing in Silicon Valley and you have a product you think so obvious you don't need marketing or sales to explain it. which is why, you know, as we say, venture capitalists sleep like babies. They sleep for 2 hours, wake up and cry, sleep for 2 hours. All exponentials look like this. They look like an S curve, that there's the flat spot, the period of acceleration, and inevitably there is a leveling off up at the top. By the way, you'll hear people talk about inflection points. Oh, the inflection point on the curve. Well, as I say on this chart, that spot, that knee on the curve is not an inflection point. And I'll spare you the mathematics. Call it a critical point, because you can put the knee on that curve anywhere you want just by fiddling with the scale of the diagram. So I'll give you another exponential example. Imagine, so how many people here are grandparents? Show of hands. Okay, if your children were really bad to you and you want to get your revenge, here is how you do it. You get to your grandchild before they have that first conversation with their parent about their allowance, and say, look, don't do the usual negotiation of, you know, 20 bucks a week or whatever it is, the going rate these days. Say, look, I'm a very modest child, full of filial piety. I don't want to be a burden on the family. So start me off at 1 penny a week and just double it every week. And the parent will walk unsuspecting into the trap. And let's see, this is October 10th. By May 1st, which would be the 33rd doubling, their weekly allowance will be greater than Bill Gates's total net worth of $78 billion. Which brings us back to the critical point, that doubling is happening all along. The critical point is that moment at which the parent realizes they've been had. And so we're surrounded by exponentials, and the critical point will be different for different industries and different individuals and the like. But it has interesting implications. Like, one thing I would think about is I would try and put as little intelligence in my buildings as possible for reasons I'll explain in a minute. The technology, there's two kinds of technologies. The technology that isn't introduced yet and the technology that's obsolete. So the moment it's introduced, it's obsolete. You know, go into Apple, buy a smartphone, and try walk back in and selling it back to them. Good luck. So this is my main first point: is nature abhors hockey sticks. It's an S curve, and there's a critical point, and that critical point will vary. But now let me do a deep dive on one exponential surprise that you've been talking about a lot this week. This, of course, is the Google robotic car picture. Well, this actually wasn't taken in October 2010. I was indirectly responsible for the New York Times breaking the story about the robotic car, Google's car. And, you know, back in 2010, it was pretty amazing. They were taking it down Lombard Street. That's what that picture is. And back then, everybody was amazed and puzzled by why Google would be doing this. And all the talking heads said, well, yeah, you know, it's going to be amazing. We're going to get robotic cars sometime in 2030. Well, you know, it's happening a little faster. And that's the funny thing about exponentials, that as you go on, it gets closer and closer. This is a picture I took in August. These little new Google, they're so cute, these things are driving around in Mountain View right now on a test basis. And the consensus is now, you hear people say, well, we're going to have them by 2020. I guarantee you, of course, I'm on record because I did an economist advance. Before 2020, we're going to have robotic cars. And so, of course, it's going to arrive more quickly. And then we have these things. So this is the Mercedes robotic concept car doing a glamour turn here in San Francisco in spring. You know, kind of looks like a silver blob of mercury. You can't see inside and the like. And the robotic lorries. Well, it's going to happen. It's going to happen real fast. But when it happens, it's not going to have the consequences everybody expects. Inevitably, when a new technology arrives, you say, oh, you know, this is going to be so utopian and wonderful. Okay, let me offer you some forecasts. Yes, we will have robotic cars in San Francisco. Most people won't own them. Uber, of course, is going into robotic cars. They basically bought the entire robotics department at Carnegie Mellon. And most of us will use it the way we use Uber. But there will be the very wealthy who will have their own robotic cars. And they'll come up to San Francisco for dinner. And even though they're very, very wealthy, they'll still be too cheap to pay for parking. And they will tell their robotic car to go drive around town while they have dinner. So we will have the prospect of traffic jams of empty robotic cars in San Francisco. I guarantee it. Also, if you're a crook, bad idea. Don't make your escape in a robotic car, because the police will be able to just not only turn it off, they'll instruct the car to bring you back. And we will have, of course, the wonderful thing I'm sure someone's mentioned during the week, it's amazing, when you have robotic cars, they can travel at 60 miles an hour, 3 feet off the bumper of the car in front of them, so we instantly increase the capacity of our freeways by 10x, and accept. And people can be thrilled, to sit in their car and do other productive things while their car's doing the driving, but they're gonna go, it's kind of a small space. And so you'll end up having, robotic sprinter vans as virtual offices. And of course, if Larry Ellison does it, he'll have an 18-wheeler like this with his office. So we'll have monster robotic cars in commutes and probably lose all that 10x space. And of course, we'll have interesting implications for suburbs, that people will now be able to commute longer than ever and commute from charismatic exurbs and the like. Same impact that the automobile at the turn of the last century suddenly made property on the top of hills really valuable. Before then, not so much, because you had to have a horse and a wagon, and the cars made it valuable. So look for big changes. And last of all, for anybody thinking about retiring, think about folks, the so-called snowbirds. In their Winnebagos, they go south in winter, they go north in summer, but they have to drive. And now they'll have robotic Winnebagos, so they can sleep through the night while their Winnebagos take them elsewhere. The one thing that is holding up robotic automobiles is not robots, and it is not technology. This story by the Associated Press this summer pretty much says it. The problem is people. That it turns out the thing that the Google robotic car has the hardest problem with is people. That comes to a four-way stop and it waits for all the other cars to stop so it can go through, except there are people behind there and they don't stop, they kind of creep and roll forward. Google car can't handle that. That's the irony, is that the perversity of human driving is the one thing that even a Google robotic car is not smart enough to figure out. And with that in mind, I want to, this is an example of how exponentials happen in surprising ways and rarely lead to utopias. Let me close with a model for you all to think about. I'm going to fly low and fast over it. It's a concept that my good friend Stuart Brand first wrote about in 1999 in a book called The Clock of the Long Now. And this is part of something I'm on the board of, the Long Now Foundation. And it was borrowed from architecture, had a notion of shear layers, and said, isn't it interesting? Present events, everything in the present occurs as an intersection of fast and slow processes. The fastest is at the top, fashion, changes like this. The slowest is at the bottom, nature is slow and stately. Well, maybe not always. Culture is a little faster than nature, governance is faster than culture, infrastructure faster, yet commerce, you get the idea. Think about the room we're in. What changes fastest here? The people sitting in a session. A little more slowly is the conference that's here this week. Slower yet, the paint on the walls, the art that's on it. Slower than that, the building. It's probably got, a 70-year useful lifetime. And then, of course, the property lines. Next time San Francisco burns to the ground and this is all gone, we will see all the buildings come up in the same place. So everything we have happening in our lives is a combination of fast and slow factors interacting together. And this is what puts the S in the S curves. It's why exponentials don't overwhelm us, because things in the bottom tend to retard things at the top, except not always. Revolutions and disruptions happen when slower layers move more quickly. Nature is slow, but a better way to think of it is the lower layers are more viscous. San Andreas Fault moves at about 2.5 inches a year. I've actually measured it on my property. I live in Hillsborough. I'm getting dragged to the northwest at 2.5 inches a year, except it's not uniform. And in 1906, it made a big shift. We had the 06 quake, big effects on governance and infrastructure and commerce. And once you get a revolution from the bottom, things start ping-ponging around. The '06 quake led directly to the panic of 1907, and it's an Urban Land Institute story. Turns out San Francisco had burned about 10 years before. All the insurers said, well, they learned their lesson. They built a fire department that's great. And so English insurers were way long on fire insurance in San Francisco. And San Francisco burns down with a little help from the US Army. And all of a sudden, all these claims mean that the insurers in England are having to send gold to the United States because we're still on the gold standard. We did not have a central bank. The Federal Reserve actually was the result of the panic of 1907. So you can thank the San Andreas Fault for the Federal Reserve. The Bank of England was our de facto bank. And they noticed that the gold was going in the wrong way. And they said, cut off the gold flow. That created the financial crisis that led to the panic of 1907. Revolutions happen when lower layers move more quickly. And just quickly, well, the slides will be up on the site. The difference between fast and slow layers. Fast layers learn, slow layers remember. Fast layers propose idea, slow layers dispose. Fast layers absorb shocks, slow layers integrate shocks. Think about that urban planning example. The fast layer absorbing shocks, we call that the fire department and the police. They're the ones who roll out when the earthquake is. The slow layer are people like you in this room who worry about building codes and designing buildings to literally, integrate the risk. Fast layers are discontinuous. Slow layers tend to be continuous. Fast layers innovate. Slow layers constrain. But the most interesting thing about that pace layer diagram, in my opinion, is not what the different layers do, but it's the boundaries between the layers that create the most interesting opportunities. This is, of course, Jupiter, courtesy of NASA, the mid-equatorial band. And notice those little blue whorls, that when you have two fluids passing each other at different velocities, you get these turbulent patterns. It's called the Kelvin-Helmholtz instability, if you want to look it up on Wikipedia. That is the creative turbulence that innovation comes out of. Think about the innovations in the spaces you work, and it's usually technology intersecting with architecture and the like. And I'll close with one thought. This is where you are. You're having this meeting here in the 9 Bay Area counties, basically Silicon Valley. That's the Great Red Spot on Jupiter. It's a 250-year-old storm about the size of the North American continent. These big storms are standing turbulent waves. And what they do is they spin off other turbulence. So maybe that, the slightly smaller storm there, that's Apple. And next to it is HP, which is getting a little smaller. And there's another small one that's getting bigger, and that's Google. And all the little ones there are all the little companies coming out of the turbulence. So keep that in mind. You are here. Turbulence is a wonderful thing. It's where innovation and opportunities come out of, and it comes because of the intersection of the ever-increasing pace of exponential change and then the slower pace of our culture, our governance, and all the things you worry about. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for sticking around for this final session. We're glad you did. We're going to spend a little bit of time here talking in more detail with Paul and also trying to bring the discussion down to the practical realities of your business in real estate and land use and thinking about what this might imply for how we practice our craft. We've been giving a lot of thought to this issue at ULI, the fact that we're in a business that uses tremendous amounts of capital to create very long-lived assets. And I think the pace layer construct is a useful way to think about it. Clearly, real estate is a slow-moving layer. And yet, we're catering to our customers who are operating in a very fast-changing environment, driven by, in large measure, technology. And we're sort of seeing that manifest itself here in the Bay Area in particular. Let me pose a question to our panelists to start out with kind of a broad question based on their own perspective. Michael with development business and Dan on the construction side. You know, in light of this kind of fast and slow dichotomy that we've got to face, what are you seeing in practical terms? How is technology affecting your business, how you're relating to your customers, the technologies that you're deploying within your projects, and the way you're managing your business?
Well, I want to start off by saying I paid a lot of money to be an icon sponsor, and I've been working my butt off all week, and I have to follow Paul. I never know what he's saying. It just always sounds cool. But we go back a long way. It's always good to hear him talk about the future.
You have no idea how it makes me nervous being on stage, knowing what he knows about.
So, yeah, you know, the technology in both directions on how we build buildings these days, and more importantly, how we think about our tenants and the technology evolution that they're going through. I said early in the week that on the opening, I said something about how many of you came here in a driverless car, and of course nobody raised their hand, but I said, well, how many of you have been on Uber and used Airbnb and Next, and everybody raised their hands, and I said, remember 5 years ago, those companies either didn't exist or they certainly weren't household names. So the speed at which companies evolve these days is a real issue for developers, because in the old days we used to talk about credit tenants, and that seemed to have a comforting sense of a long-term investment in a credit tenant like Lehman Brothers or Kodak, you know, great companies that, you know, they're certainly going to outlive a 10-year lease, right? So that didn't work so good. Then we got the dot-com era, and those companies were good for, you know, 6 to 15 months, because whenever we interviewed those people for their business plan, they said, and they showed running out of money in 15 months. We said, well, what's the plan after that? And they said, we'll get some more. So, you know, we go through these cycles, and it's hard to know what the right way to finance and develop some of those buildings. But because they are long-term assets, you know, I think the first part of our strategy is we think of tenants as short-term investments. We hope they survive. We're not smarter than the market. And so we try to build buildings that are flexible. And so, you know, that's sort of the first theme for us is we want to make sure buildings are reusable, that we don't overcapitalize them in ways that they'll have no future use. And that's our way of trying to connect to the demands of the companies.
Does that lead you to consider new building forms, you know, changes in some of the basic rules of thumb about the business in terms of floor plates or you know, building depths or, you know, site requirements, FAR? I mean, there's a whole range of kind of cultural practices in this business.
Yeah, you know, we had a panel at my council this week on the subject of the big gorillas down in Silicon Valley, Facebook, Google, Apple, and all the others, and how they are, you ask them what the most important thing in their model for hiring people, and it's community. And then you look at their buildings, and they aren't part of the community at all. They have a community, right, but they're all inward facing. And then when you get to the city, you know, they're struggling with how to connect with the city residents because, again, they want to be inward facing. So it makes us think when there are historic buildings we deal with, which we do a lot of, you know, those have the bones they have. If you can build from the ground up, you're really struggling because the market has changed so much. You know, I don't know if we're developing a high-rise for a financial company, a bank, a tech company, and, you know, do they want tall ceilings? Do they want drop ceilings? Do they want 35,000-foot floor plates? Do they want to climb up and down stairs? You know, so there's all those considerations that go into the different kinds of design you do and the different kinds of thoughts you have. Again, you're in your environment, but you're trying to make it ubiquitous to as many as you can. Not an easy task.
Right. Dan, what are you seeing in construction business? Similar question. You know, how do you adapt to rapid change when you're dealing with centuries-old technologies?
Well, the construction business, in my mind, has done, as an industry, a bad job of adapting technology. I mean, I think the last 20 years, you've seen the design business totally transformed and the communication of information totally transformed, you know, from two-dimensional and paper to three-dimensional and digital. So that part of the business has, you know, adapted technology very well, but the actual building process of how a building gets built and put together is remarkably like it was 20 or 30 years ago, right? I mean, there are some improvements and some better efficiencies through technology, and the communication going right to manufacturers and fabricators has helped. But really, it's sort of around the edges for construction. It's been very minor improvements. I'm hopeful, and I think over the next few years, though, you're going to see that change. I mean, the driverless cars, there'll be driverless equipment then, right? I mean, you'll have equipment that operates itself. Now, there's all sorts of social and union and political issues around a question like that I certainly can't figure out. But, there's also positives in terms of cost and efficiency and safety. I mean, I always think, you look in a very tall building we're building, and there's still guys out on scaffolding on swing stages up 1,000 or 1,200 feet, which seems sort of archaic, right? I mean, that we're doing this still, and you think of, in the next 10 years, will there be drones that could do this work, and somebody sitting in a safe environment and making sure it's done right, but not out there. So I think the process is going to, the Moore's law idea is going to accelerate the physical process now, similar to what happened to the communication and design information. The flexibility of buildings is a tough one. I mean, we wrestle with this all the time. And every time I look back at conversations we had 5 or 10 years ago about potential uses of buildings, it's ludicrous how off we were, right? I mean, we were trying to figure out, I don't know, bigger cables or bigger conduits and stuff like that, thinking we were future thinking, and then everything's wireless. So, like, your ability to predict users and technology, 10 years from now as everything accelerates, is it's very tough. I mean, so you can be flexible in terms of the type of structure, and that there's going to be change. But actually, what that change will be is, I think it's almost impossible.
Paul.
Though, as you're talking about that, I have 2 thoughts. One, for starters, it's why I'm always amazed by your business. The first building of any consequence in Stanford Industrial Park, this is Fred Terman, professor, set it up. How many people have been to the Varian building? Show of hands. Woo. You all need to get out more. It's the first building, and so Fred Terman went to Stanford and said, give me a 100-year lease on this. I need a place for my graduate students. And they built the Varian building, and it was designed explicitly to be turned into a high school if Varian failed. And so people have been trying to do this since the birth of Silicon Valley. And of course, in this case, it's still the Varian building.
Right. Similar story, I think, with the lab at MIT that's been repurposed many, many times and essentially it is a container for technological innovation. Yeah. I mean, maybe we're trying too hard. Maybe what we really need to do is to think about universal building prototypes that can adapt to lots of different things inside.
Or adapt to what you don't know is going to happen, but as flexible for anything, not just thinking, anytime you think it's going to happen, 5 or 10 years from now, you're wrong.
Right. Paul, I wanted to ask you about the sort of this notion of the Internet of Things and the incredible interconnectedness and the ability to monitor various phenomena. What does that potentially lead us to in terms of creating environments, managing environments? Are you seeing the real application of that notion that we've got a ton of data that can help us manage our environments more effectively actually being applied?
Well, we're going to continue. I mean, the reason why we talk about big data is not because we have a lot of data, because we actually don't. Compared to what we're going to have in a few years, this is like, it's hilarious that people use.
We have a lot of pictures of cats, though. I mean,
it is true. But it's the gap between the data volumes and the sense-making tools. That's the big problem. Sensors are proliferating. You all are experiencing that. We're going to be dealing with this. The sense-making tools. That's just going to keep getting worse in the short term. Yeah. But also at the same time, I think there's going to be a lot of volatility in the sensors, a lot of volatility in the communication systems. I always think about the fast and slow things in buildings, and I think of the Citibank building in New York, which had that funny angle because it was going to be solar collectors that never worked. It's why I said in my talk, I would avoid as much as possible putting intelligence in the buildings unless you can yank it out. the conduit pipe is more important than the fiber. I mean, just in my house, I'm a nerd, you know, when I bought the house, I ran Cat 5 everywhere, had to yank it out, put in Cat 6, and now I'm pulling that out and I have to put in fiber. And thank God, you know, I had the presence of mind to put conduit in. And of course, once I get the fiber in, then it's going to go away because we're going to have some super duper version of Wi-Fi that violates the speed of light.
Right.
Mike, when you're building your buildings, you know, what has technology brought you in recent years with respect to more efficiently managing the resources that go into a major property?
Yeah, I've been, you know, talked about the standards that have been evolving over the years, LEED, silver, gold, platinum. And, you know, developers take a lot of pride in saying they're developing a LEED anything, something building. And, you know, no developer did that on purpose. They were all doing it because their tenants came to them, the Googles of the world, and said, we're not going to a building unless it's at least LEED, gold, or silver. And we said, God, that's exactly what we had in mind. We're going to convert this building to LEED gold because that's the right thing to do. And it's the only way we could get tenants to come to San Francisco. So, you know, there's a push-pull between, you know, meeting the market and doing what, you know, you would instinctively think might be the right thing to do. But developers, on average, you know, respond to those kinds of things. Today, Title 24 and all the things we live with here in California have to do with the way the glass systems work and how much they can reflect glass and how much heat stays in and how much cold. And so all of a sudden, we're really excited about glass, right? Because now we have to keep up with the codes. You know, we've seen the demonstrations, we haven't put one in yet, in our buildings yet, but the glass that, you know, completely adapts to the sunshine. So if you're on that side of the building and the sun's coming up, the glass turns more opaque. And in the afternoon, it brightens up again. And so those are, you know, amazing changes that can make buildings more efficient, which is a key, and effective. You know, the lighting that people, this would not be good lighting, the lighting that people work under is an important thing. There's a lot of science going into that. The sound attenuation, you know, all the 12 of you at that table with headphones typing away on your systems. You know, there's a whole lot of that we have to think about in terms of how the people connect to the building and how the building connects to the atmosphere. So it's a lot tougher, you know, to do. But the combination of the tenant demands and the system codings are, you know, pushing the buildings in the right way, and energy efficiency continues to go, maybe not Moore's Law yet, but certainly on an upward curve.
Right. You know, my sense about the whole web of development regulation, from building codes to zoning and the whole regime that developers have to work with and planners have to work with, is in many ways a constraint to this more adaptive kind of built environment that is more responsive to technological innovation. But as you point out, it can also be a driver of innovation. Dan, how do you see it? Sort of start maybe with building codes, which you operate in that world. Constraint or opportunity?
Yeah, I think of them as being more reactive or trying to catch up with trends than like pulling us forward. You know, one area that, you know, building technology has been dramatically better is the systems, which were sort of, in my mind, used to be static and now they're dynamic. So the energy systems are, you know, actively they're not just monitoring any use, but they're, you know, they're shedding load and they're doing all those things. So, you know, my impression is it's demand and it's tenants and it's owners and technology pushing forward, and the building codes more like a half step behind more than they are driving the market.
I have a favorite story I tell about change, and it is we bought the Southern Pacific headquarters building down here at One Market in 1998, and we got a lot of great old photographs that they had around, and one of them was they had long wings on the building, long legs on the buildings, and there's just pictures of everybody at work, and everybody at work was average 50 years old, male, white shirt and tie, at a desk, lined up as far as you can see and as close together as you could get. And that was during the era, that little dot-com era, when everybody had open space plans. And they were, in the middle, of course, was this place where we had all the offices, but the open space plans were supposed to be so cool, but they were really a reflection back to what they were doing in the 1920s. They just were wearing jeans and t-shirts, and they were just as crowded, but it was cool. And there's a little bit of that going on today, you know. I think that there's a sense that that kind of space is cool because everybody's next to each other, but they can go over there into all those little conference rooms and have quiet. And so it's going to be interesting whether that sticks, you know, whether 10 years from now, those 25-year-olds will be 35-year-olds and they'll want an office. And then we'll be stuck having to build offices again.
Right.
So it's hard to tell.
One thing that's truly weird that mystifies me that's coming back in Silicon Valley is ties.
Yeah, no way.
And software engineers went through a phase where there was not a lot, but a significant minority of male software engineers were wearing dresses for a while. Not kilts, dresses, go figure. But now it's like they think suits and ties are like really exotic.
I need to know, are they fat ties or skinny ties? That's an important part of the cycle.
Got to be skinny ties.
Paul, the sharing economy, the notion of the sharing economy, the notion of tapping excess capacity by using accessible technology is a pretty well accepted phenomenon around the country today, around the world. Where do you see it going, and what concerns you about that?
Oh boy, that's a big topic. You know, I think the place where it picks up is you look for underused resources. And the obvious, so Airbnb and Uber, of course, are going that way. So I just look for slack resources. Mm-hmm. Those are the natural places to do it. I think we're going to see a lot of surprises. But I'd also say it's not just a sharing economy, it's a creator economy. That these are transactions that get interesting because we think we're consuming something, but in fact we're creating something. Like, you know, what was your Google subscription last month? Absolutely essential tool, and subscription was $0, except it's not. You pay with the question you ask. Google just wants to give you an answer good enough to keep you coming back because your answers when aggregated, or your questions when aggregated, all the questions are the basis of their model. That's what I'd look for, is places where it's not just an underused resource, but you can pay with something that has no value to you, but has huge value to the company.
I'd love to chit-chat about the car thing, because, you know, when you talk about the connectivity of technology and real estate, that has the potential to be the most dramatic. And whether or not they're driving next to each other at, you know, 80 miles an hour because they can. I mean, if you think about all the displacement of that concept, you know, you call for your car in the morning to take you to work, gets you to work, drops you off, goes back to the barn. Don't need a parking lot, right? We build a lot of parking lots.
No, the parking lot is where all the cars go hang out and smoke cigarettes while they're waiting.
They go to Antioch or something where there's a lot of land. But so that's the first thing. So now if they actually do save lives, like the math is, there are 500,000 auto deaths a year. And if cars don't crash, there's no more deaths. So what does that do to the repair business? What does that do to auto insurance brokers? What does that do to hospital emergency rooms? You know, there's a whole ripple effect, good or bad, but mostly from a real estate standpoint.
You notice he didn't mention what does that do to lawyers.
I can hope. Sorry. But, you know, the real estate impact of parking lots and not needing them and usable space, that all of a sudden, you know, we have capacity again. Obviously, we're screwed in most cities with traffic and the price of housing. If you now have all these land that's available that you could build housing, if you have freeways, which now have no capacity at rush hour, but all of a sudden they do because you can put 10 times the number of cars, it really makes the built environment a whole different place. And, you know, considering you all have an iPhone, of which hopefully only a third of you are looking at while we're doing this, because that would be good. You know, that came out in 2007. That's 8 years ago. You know, go to an airport and look around while you're waiting for your plane and see if anybody's not looking down. And so, you know, you take that sort of amount of change and you take what the driverless car could do, and whether it's 5 years from now, like the guy on Google said on 60 Minutes Sunday. He said, "Do you really think it'll be 5 years?" And his answer was, "Well, I have an 11-year-old son, and in 4.5 years he can drive, and I really want that not to happen." So he made a 5-year commitment that there will be driverless cars. So whether he's off by 2 or 3 or whatever, the order of magnitude is, it is just overwhelming what that could mean. And I don't think our industry wants to face that. I think it's going to hit us in the back of the head someday.
And I bet it'll be sooner if he is saying at Google it's 5 years. Somehow I bet it's 3 years or it's less. Like it just keeps accelerating.
But what about the
That's what exponentials do, is it compresses it. So,
Yeah.
and I'm absolutely counting on 2019 because 3 years ago I had to do a debate for The Economist magazine, and then I went on record.
Go.
You're, cannot wait.
Never
But-
go in print.
But also, as you're talking about the cars, part of the surprise of the robotic cars was, we were all talking about robotic cars in the 90s, but everybody said, well, we need intelligent vehicle highway systems, stuff. The moment you do infrastructure, it slows down to a stop. And the big insight that Sebastian Thrun had at Google was you could put the intelligence in the car and keep the highway stupid. Though admittedly, it's less stupid when it's robotic cars and not human drivers. But that's another story. But it's where I think in the construction business and the TIs, you got to be really careful. Obviously, you got to put stuff into the building that's intelligence, but think about that Google robotic example, that they were able to move fast because there was no technology in the road. And how can you slip into a world where you take advantage, put the technology in the things that come and go the fastest, and avoid having to put it into the things that change slowest?
But do you think you don't put the technology into the building? You just assume the tenants or whoever are going to?
Well, I mean, you could just make, Mike pay for all the technology. But I would do hard questions, say, do I absolutely
Everybody
have
else
to
does.
put something into the structure?
Yeah. But it's so hard to project what's going to be the right
That's why I
technology.
do as little as possible. Don't be like me in my house where I have to crawl under the house every 4 years to replace cables
Yeah.
because I'm such a lousy forecaster.
There's definitely a push and pull.
Not very good at predicting the future,
with-
are you?
Driverless cars, clearly, the impacts that you mentioned, Michael, with the availability, the newly available land that's freed up in the center city, there's definitely a facilitation of more compact development patterns at the metropolitan scale. On the other hand, there's the ease of much more distant commuting now, right?
Sure.
Which we're going to need both, I think, at the end of the day. For those of you who've been hanging around panels talking about the millennials, it's not that they're not going to move to the suburbs or they're not going to have kids. They're just slow. They're just taking a little longer. But they're going to want to live in the suburbs. They're going to want to have families out there. And so there's a need for both. And the old folks are coming back to the city because they want to be awake and charged up.
That's why I think at an urban level, the big mistake of the last century to avoid is creating monocultures. Our problem was we had an internal combustion monoculture. That the future is not just robotic cars. We need integrated transportation systems. We absolutely need high-speed rail here in California. And no, it is not likely that we're going to have the Hyperloop system that I'm on record forecast. This is, the pneumatic tube
Yeah.
thing. No.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take over the moderator's job, but can I ask him one question when
Please, yes, go ahead.
you're at a place? I really want to know. I'm scared to death that all those movies that we've seen that predicted the future have come true, like Minority Report when the guy had the computer up on the wall and he was doing all this and he was making stuff bigger and sliding stuff over and you looked at that and went, wow, and now it's here. I'm scared to death of artificial intelligence. Every movie about artificial intelligence starts with the Terminator and with Will Smith. They end up being too smart. So, Mr. Futurist,
Yeah,
can
well,
artificial
I looked right into
intelligence
that one.
really get to that point where it says, Mr. Human, you're just not that good, and we're going to make sure we do it our way?
I was talking to some folks at lunch today, and I offered a forecast. And then, so I'll give you the forecast. If we do get super intelligences, there are two kinds of artificial intelligence. There's artificial general intelligence. Those are the general purpose brains. Then there's narrow AI. That would be like the technology in the Google car. Narrow AI is everywhere. By the way, you all already travel in robotic vehicles regularly. Anybody who doesn't live in San Francisco traveled in one to get here. A 777 or an A340 flying at altitude is not flown by a pilot. The pilots physically cannot fly those planes. It is flown by a computer, and when they do things, they're basically having a conversation with the computer. And we saw the hazards of that with the crash of Air France 447. Really what's going on, a book to read. John Markoff, New York Times, titled Machines of Loving Grace, and he brought out into public a debate that's been going on for a couple of decades in this business between AI and IA. AI, artificial intelligence, creating the superbrains. That started in 1956. John McCarthy, professor at Stanford, was the main exponent. Also at Stanford, Stanford Research Institute was Doug Engelbart, who said, no, the point of using the computers is not to create artificial intelligences, but to create intelligence augmentation, tools that make us smarter and more effective. So one vision is AI, machines replace us. The other vision is the machines become our assistants and our companions. Pay attention to that. I think the latter is more likely. However, if we do get the super intelligent AIs who evolve faster than us, as I was saying to some of your colleagues at lunch, I have a forecast. The optimistic forecast of a world of super smart robots, if we're very, very lucky, they will treat us like pets.
I feel better.
However, if we are very, very unlucky, they will treat us like food.
But is there any real
I withdraw the
example
question.
of artificial intelligence sort of gone wild where it's gone out on its own or taking over? Is there any?
Oh, yeah. There are lots of examples of things taking over, and they're not necessarily so intelligent. Way back in 1987, the market crash was caused by program trading.
Yep.
You don't need intelligence when the pace of the machines is so much faster than human thought. That with the program trading algorithms way back in the dark ages of 1987, they were so busy talking to each other that the humans didn't even know the conversation was going on, and then they couldn't break into the conversation in time to stop it. And Air France 447 is actually a very poignant example. 2007, plane flying at altitude, it went from normal flight at altitude to hitting the water in 8.5 minutes. And what happened is the conditions that the computer, the ADRRU on the computer, fell outside of boundary conditions because of a sensor failure. There are 3 what are called pitot tubes that sense airspeed. They hit a situation where all 3 pitot tubes clogged up. The computer, being a French computer, went, I have no idea what to do. And the pilots are sitting there going, Whiskey Tango Fox. And the pilots actually figured out what happened.
I just got that. Wait a minute. Say that again.
The really sad thing was the pilots actually figured it out. They figured it out 30 seconds too late. So the real challenge, while we're sitting around waiting for super intelligent machines, the real challenge, and this really goes into your business, is making sure we design systems so that the not so smart machines that already exist know when to scream for help, and scream for help in a way that humans understand. NASA, just not to completely beat the example to death. Tokyo, when they started automating their subway lines, a line at a time, they thought, well, we have to have a human in there just in case something goes wrong. So they had an operator with their hand on a dead man switch that they could pull if something went wrong. After about 6 months, they quietly took the operators out because they realized all the accidents were being caused by the operator and not the machine. NASA looks at this a lot, and again, part of the problem with airplanes, you gotta have people in a lean forward mode ready to react. And so what NASA did is they designed software where the plane system actually asks the pilot for help even when it doesn't need it. It said, could you kind of scratch my back here or adjust this knob there,
to keep
keeping
them
the
engaged.
pilots engaged.
Okay. That's interesting.
You've lost complete.
So the question was,
Let me at least repeat the question. My job has been reduced to repeating the question. For those of you who are further back in the audience, the question was about how do you prevent a human override of technology when the guy flew into the Alps? Paul.
Well, you know, I think it was Einstein who said the different, you know, there are certainly limits to human intelligence, but there's no limit to human stupidity. Mm. And designing systems to protect against that sort of thing. You know, with robotic cars, like I said earlier, you know, don't use a robotic car as your getaway vehicle, because there'll be the remote control. In the case of aircraft, you know, we're moving more and more towards continuous links and remote control is what I think will happen.
Let me ask one last question. We're just about out of time, and I'm going to seize control of the stage again by leaning forward.
Well done.
But here's the question. You know, when you think about technology as it applies to real estate, you know, what makes you hopeful? What seems to be a sign of a potential real breakthrough, or something that's going to make your business perform better, your tenants happier, your buildings better? Is there something out there that you either see coming or that you'd love to see coming?
You know, I think of it in just the macro of, I love the new world of disruptive technology. I just think there's something really exciting about it. And you know, the disruptors are going to get disrupted. There's just a continuing flow of this. And so that means companies are going to have reasons to build and grow, and
change.
They're going to want to have employees. And I think it's just good for the economy. And San Francisco is sort of the poster child of that today with the explosion since 2010. So it's the whole concept of technology as a feeder to an industry that wants to be fed and wants to help. It wants to build the right thing. So that's, to me, the most exciting thing.
I would say that the dynamic systems in buildings now, the energy efficiency, the comfort of, you know, the glass systems, and, you know, I think that buildings are much easier to, or better for the occupants. They work better. They're more sophisticated, and I do think we're on that upward trend of you know, accelerating that.
Technologies I love are the technologies that support conversation. Mm-hmm. Think about it. Business is just a conversation. Society is a conversation. And the technologies that make it easier for people to interact and have those broader conversations, I love. The technology that makes me nervous is what you were talking about, the photochromic windows. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm old enough to remember photo gray lenses in the 1980s. Yeah. And they were really tacky. and they had historicity and didn't last long. Don't make our buildings look like 1980s glasses.
Sunglasses.
That's my one request.
Got it.
Okay.
Well, I love the quote that business is a conversation. We've all had a great conversation this last several days. On behalf of ULI, let me thank you all for your attendance here this week. I hope you've enjoyed the meeting. We look forward to seeing you at future ULI meetings. Certainly, we hope you have gotten good take-home value, something we really strive for out of these conferences. But let's close there, and if you please join me in thanking our panel.